improv does not indicate a lack of preparation. So I want to be real clear there. When we present, when we're speaking to the board, when we're on a sales call, we are trying to ignite the emotional response from our audience. And when we are wholly reliant on preparing the verbal execution of every thought, we are now operating in headspace and not in heart space. What improv does distinctly is allows us to operate in heart space while having prepared in headspace.
Hey, you found Ways We Learn, an investigation of how learning happens across all ages and modalities. Let's go learn something. Hi, and welcome back to Ways We Learn. I'm Sean, and I'm here with Joe, and I first heard of today's guest in the context of an event she ran this summer. The event was called, and I am not making this up, the first qualifying round of the World Championship of PowerPoint Karaoke. Now, you hear a name like the World Championship of PowerPoint Karaoke, and what else do you do but reach out and meet this person? So it turns out Minna Taylor is an accomplished presentation and speaking coach and a world traveler. She's the founder of Energize Your Voice and the author of The Confident Body. And she's activated programs all over the world for organizations such as Uber, Red Bull, TikTok, EY, and numerous startups and nonprofits. And she's just a delight to talk with, as you'll soon see. So today, we'll be learning from Minna why and how we should incorporate play in our presentations. So Minna, thank you so much for joining Ways We Learn.
Sean, Joe, I'm very excited to engage in conversation with you all.
Let's start with your background. I know you've got some background in acting and improv, and just tell us a little bit about where you came from.
Whenever someone asks that question, I think we can tend to default to something that feels somewhat perfunctory. And being as I do have a background in acting, I like to make it feel a bit more story-driven. So I like to think about it more as my origin story as the hero of my own life. I grew up on a farm in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia, and I think that's really informative in terms of how it's shaped the way I think about play and the freedom of expression. It's shaped the way how I think about relationship and community engagement. If anyone's from the South, you know you cannot walk down the street and get out of stop and chat with somebody that lasts less than 5 minutes. And so you just sort of learn to engage in these organic, collaborative, co-created moments of interaction. Then I found myself moving from a small town on a farm in Virginia to New York City, where I went to study acting at NYU Tisch. And why that's relevant, I then went on to get my master's degree from Brooklyn College, also in acting. And in both NYU and in Brooklyn College, I studied 3 foundational practices. One being phonetics, one being a voice, breath, body technique. And the last one is the acting technique that I learned, which is called the practical aesthetics for the actor. What all of this really demonstrated for me is not only the power of expression, the ability to express freely with strategy, but also that so many of these fundamental elements can bring our humanity into deeper focus, and we can actually practice them. They can become behaviors. I entered into NYU with a voice that was probably 2 octaves higher. I had a Southern accent. And by the end of the first year, my voice had dropped into register, which we call the chest resonance. It had become so full and dynamic and vibrant, and I had completely gotten rid of my Southern accent. And this was only because of consistent and diligent attention to the practices that I was learning. Now, if we think about acting background and how it's relevant to what our topic is today, all acting is at its core is listening and responding. It is truth telling with strategy. So what am I receiving and how do I respond back to what I've just received in service of an ultimate objective? And this can either be predetermined or determined as the flow happens. So I trained in both improv and formal theater, and that really shaped how I understood not only myself, but how I then observed the world around me and made determinations about my place within that world.
Wow, nice. And then that brings you to the PowerPoint Karaoke World Championships, of course.
Yeah, that's a natural extension.
Natural
Okay, so, all
progression.
right, let me go back and fill in some dots here. Um, so when I first got out of graduate school, my first job, I was an actor. I did pursue acting for a moment in time. Uh, and my first job, sort of gigging, was teaching acts introduction to corporate clients. And so that was my first entry
Cool.
into the corporate world. And I was also helping them with presentation skills. And this was on a one-on-one basis. It was literally, I just geeked out on phonetics in school, the standard American dialect. And so I found this job on Craigslist. They were like, yeah, let's do it. And totally random. And through that, I started to just coach more, just get asked to coach more in both acts introduction, voice, and presentation skills. I then had a friend that was like, hey, can you teach a workshop? And I said, on presentations. And I said, I don't actually know what a presentation is because I've never had to give one. But yes, I can do that because when when you're starting a business, you say yes.
Absolutely.
And I was like, I'll figure it out. So I was like, okay, how am I going to do this? And improv training in my graduate program, we learn not only the skill of performing improv, but also how to instruct improv toward determinate skill building. And so I was like, all right, let me leverage improv here and have them give presentations, and I will give them feedback as if I were a theater director. So thinking about body language and audience interaction and vocal tone and storytelling. And lo and behold, that is a format that really worked. And so I just started doing that, getting asked to do that more and more. And then ultimately I decided to go all in and to start my company. That was 10 years ago. And
Wow.
Uber was actually my first client. So I really just hit it out of the park right off
That's
the bat. I
impressive.
was very fortunate for that. And as I started my business, one of the tools that I came clued into is the notion of activating the public through experiential opportunities. So public classes rather than just doing it for corporate. So I ran a speech class and I ran a brand storytelling class and a first impressions workshop and a breath voice workshop. And one of the classes that I taught is called PowerPoint Happy Hour, which was just PowerPoint, improvised PowerPoint presentations. And P.S., you all, I thought I came up with this and I thought I was a genius. I was like, oh my gosh, this is so obvious. It's going to be so fun. I didn't know that across the world, people have been including this for a really long time, that I was taking full credit in the immediate term. And I ran this for a couple of years. It's actually the last thing I did in person prior to the pandemic. And then, of course, then I stopped running public classes. And once the pandemic sort of started to move out, I went to Europe. I had a couple speaking opportunities there, and a client was starting to come back. So I had some client work. And so I found myself in Amsterdam for a speaking opportunity. I was staying at one of my friend's houses. She was away with her kids on holiday. Don't worry, I'm getting to the World Championship here in a moment. And we were going to overlap by one night. And I said, okay, good. I get to see you. She's like, I'm sorry I can't stay longer. I'm going to Paris the next day with my new partner. And I said, rough life. Well, it gets better, Joe, because I said, listen, I'm also going to Paris the next day. And why don't I cancel my train ticket and we'll all carpool? And she said, amazing. So we all did it. And I got to meet her partner for the first time. And this was Nathan. So we're almost to Belgium and we're sort of getting to know each other. And who are you and what do you do? And Nathan says, well, I'm a moderator and a facilitator. I also run this event called PowerPoint Karaoke, which is improvised PowerPoint presentations. And I said, Nathan, I also run an event based on improvised PowerPoint presentations. What are the odds that we should find ourselves on a road trip to Paris doing this the most random thing? We must do something with this moment. And so we started brainstorming. And ultimately, what it came down to is this. If there could be televised competitive eating, why can there not also be competitive improvised PowerPoint presentations? And as we came to discover, PowerPoint karaoke is a real kind of underground movement.
It's a real
And
thing.
we said, there is no championship, there is no destination for the most accomplished, world renowned improvised PowerPoint presenters. We must create a space for them. Thus was born Slide Slam, the World Championship of PowerPoint Karaoke. And we launched that at Boom Chicago in Amsterdam back in March. And then we very quickly followed it up with our first qualifying rounds.
And it's fantastic that you launched with the World Championship and then did the qualifying rounds. I love aiming high like that. That's awesome.
You know, I had that same thought. And we were like, but
why not?
Because I was just in our mind, we were like, we just got to do one event. Let's see what happens. And it was, first of all, we did a Boom Chicago. And for anyone that doesn't know, Boom Chicago is one of the most famous improvised comedy spaces in the world, definitely in Europe. I didn't know that at the time.
And you went in not knowing that's where you were doing this?
Then you were at Boom Chicago. I walked into the space. I was like, oh my goodness. And it was epic. It was so epic. And it was absolutely, we kicked it off like a world championship and we rose to the occasion and it was incredible. And people were like, oh my God, what are you doing that one? So we were like, all right, let's ride this train. Like, let's just make it happen.
So tell us about a typical event. Like what is this experience of PowerPoint karaoke?
At the very basis, it's exactly what I've expressed, which is improvised PowerPoint presentations. Now, of course, it being a championship, there are rules and constraints that create a bit of a challenge for the improviser. If we were to just give you a deck and have you make your way through it, I think pretty much anyone can do that. Maybe not with the greatest of ease, but ultimately they would find their way to the end. What we ask people to do is to present 10 slides from a deck that Nathan and I make these decks. We use the help of AI. Thank you, technology. We actually tried that last time. I didn't find it terribly helpful, but I'm also somewhat of a troglodyte, so there you go. So we make these decks, 10 slides. They each have 7 minutes to present the 10 slides. And the through line of it must pertain to a topic determined by the audience. So for example, in our qualifying round at Tumler, someone was given the topic of Pampers, diapers, right? Pampers. So we established the topic of Pampers. Here's what I feel about Pampers. This is my point of view around Pampers. And then he goes into the slide deck to start presenting the deck, and it's all about tiny cars. And so he had to thread Pampers into this deck that was largely constructed around the notion of tiny cars. And the decks have like a semblance of logic, but nothing that feels terribly cohesive. And he's actually one of our qualifiers for the World Championship. It was amazing. Everyone, I have never heard a room full of people laugh so hard and to see a presenter hold the audience in the palm of his hand.
Wow.
It was so visceral. It was amazing. It was so fun because it's the thing about improv and the thing about play, and I know we'll get to this in a moment, but how I define play is that intangible space of unpredictability and aliveness. So when we're engaged in conversation, when we're engaged in gameplay, when we're ready to make our next move or trying to calculate our next move, the presence there, the moment before action takes place, it's palpable. There is something that is so discernible about that moment of inaction before a catalyst. And that is what you could feel. It was just like this continuous space, and we were all riding this momentum together. And it was so immediate. It was so alive. It was incredible.
That's so cool. And you're talking about this sort of energy that's just present all the way through. Now, was this guy who qualified, is he an improv performer? Does he have a background doing this stuff?
He is not an improv performer. I think where his advantage came in, and he will likely back me up on this, he was a preacher's kid. So he often found himself at the front of a congregation growing up, which I think helped in just developing the habit around speaking in public. And he's in sales.
So he's a great BSer.
So he's
Great
comfortable. Yeah.
BSer, great kind of showman. The
Mhm.
charisma was like fully dialed. Yeah.
Wow.
Have you seen? Have you? I feel like the premise of the PowerPoint karaoke is an interesting way to bring improv to your clients are all corporate, right?
Mhm.
It's such an interesting way to bring the idea of improv and being silly and kind of being comfortable in your own skin to corporate clients, like kind of a world they understand. So it's not just like, oh, we're doing a skit about a guy who lost his, cell phone in the toilet, right? It's actually about something that's like in their realm. Have you actually tried to use it in some of your corporate coaching and clients yet?
Absolutely. So we have
That's
the
awesome.
I've used it very traditionally. Nathan uses it very traditionally with his clients as well. So independently, we've done it. With Slide Slam, what we do is, yes, we bring it into corporate partners for that exact reason, Joe. You're spot on there. It gives them something that feels more meaningful, more relevant to something that pertains to their day to day work lives. What we've really determined is in calling it Slide Slam, sort of removing the notion of world championship, we can now bring it into organizations where it doesn't have that weight to it.
Mm-hmm.
But we create clubs, we create corporate clubs. So, for example, Uber can say, oh, we have a Slide Slam club. So it's akin to
Cool.
Toastmasters in that way.
Hmm.
So we'll give a little training and then they can just have this consistent destination to come and create community, build teams, and of course, develop professionally.
And so in these events, the people who are performing are typically not performers. These are just average
Regular
people.
old people.
So with no preparation, with no experience doing improv or acting or something like that, these people are coming in and performing a slideshow karaoke, a PowerPoint karaoke, sorry. They're coming in and performing this in front of a live audience in
Yep,
this event, which is
correct.
amazing. It's a lot of confidence for these people to do that.
Well,
And
Sharon, on that point
Yeah.
exactly, this is the coolest thing.
yeah,
It takes a lot of confidence and I would say guts, right?
yeah,
To get up
Yeah.
and willingness to take risks, to get up and do it. The confidence piece, and of course, I have many thoughts on confidence, seeing as how I wrote a book on it. But the confidence piece, the perception comes after the fact
oh,
of being
interesting.
able to get up there and experience the freedom of having taken that risk, of having sort of stepped outside one's comfort zone, stretched and survived. That's really where we see the magic happen, is
Hmm.
post presentation for the contestants specifically.
Hmm.
So you're saying that contestants aren't confident on minute one of the presentation, and it's only the confidence comes at the. I guess it makes sense.
No,
I feel like you
they
need to have confidence to raise your hand.
No, but I get
My
it. You're saying
gosh.
guts, though. Guts.
My
You're
guts,
willing
yeah.
to do the scary thing, even if you don't feel like you're going to be great
I
Oh my
at it
hear you.
gosh.
I hear
necessarily.
you.
Yeah.
Every single person who participates in these events without fail is like, Minna, I I think I'm just gonna really mess it. I'm just really, really gonna mess it up. And I was like, there's literally no way you can mess it up because there's nothing to mess up yet. Whatever you create is what it is, and it
Yeah.
cannot be messed up because there is nothing to change. You're creating
Yeah.
it on the fly, right? And so that's where the mindset shift really happens. And that's where the power of improv really comes in. There's nothing to mess up. There are rules of the game, but how we play the game has yet to be determined. So
Yeah.
whatever it is exactly what it should be.
Spoken like a true improv teacher. So that takes me to one of my next questions, which is why, when you think about a typical PowerPoint presentation, it's something that you've spent weeks putting together, and you've agonized over the flow of this thing and what you're going to say on each slide, and maybe you've written some notes and stuff like this. I'm sort of going through the typical, I think, PowerPoint mindset. Um, why why would someone who does that want to bring improv in when in a sales call, in a presentation to the board, any of these professional situations, their goal is to come across as polished as possible? So what do they gain by bringing play and improv into that experience?
It's a great question. Improv does not indicate a lack of preparation. So I want to be real clear there.
Okay.
That does not mean, hey, Mark, make me a deck. I'll see you on Thursday, right? It's
Right.
like, no, make me the deck 3 weeks at a time. I'm going to assess the deck. I'm going to understand the narrative flow of the deck so I can have a general sense of where we're heading. What are the highlights? But when we present, when we're speaking to the board, when we're on a sales call, when we are trying to ignite the emotional response from our audience. And when we are wholly reliant on preparing the verbal execution of every thought, we are now operating in head space and not in heart space. What improv does distinctly is allows us to operate in heart space while having prepared in head space. So when we think about preparing, we want to have a clear narrative thread. I think where people tend to go wrong here is they look at the deck and they look at it slide by slide. Rather than a cohesive narrative. So rather than slide by slide, we need to think, where does the slide land on the arc of the story? How do these 2 or 3 slides indicate the status quo where we are? And how do I tell that story in a way that isn't about regurgitating what's on the slide, but it's about telling the story of what that slide represents? And in so doing, not only will you capture all the relevant data, but you will be more influential because of the way in which you presented that data feels grounded in something that's distinctly human. And people are really committed to the fact that everybody wants hard facts, hard data. Of course, like people are numbers people. It's fine. Like, what's the bottom line? I got you. But if I just give you the bottom line, you will feel like there's something missing. You will feel short-shrifted. So improv allows you to have a point of view. It allows you to, in the moment, be responsive to the audience. So if you planned it so close ahead of time and then you show up into that space and someone is more laid back than you anticipate, or more rigid than you anticipate, or maybe distracted, maybe late to the game, maybe they send a replacement, you need to be able to adapt. And if you have not prepared with an improviser mindset, then you have set yourself up for failure. And although I do feel like failure is a valuable tool, if that is sort of the predominant experience throughout a presentation, then you will left feeling incomplete. And everyone will be feeling incomplete. And frankly, it'll be a waste of time. It really gives you permission to be strategic and truthful. Again, going back to acting, that's what it is. We just don't have a script.
Yeah, and you mentioned before the notion of acting being response and not memorize lines that you're just going to say at the right time, but actually responding to other people. And I guess that would take us to the notion of not just presenting this stuff, not just throwing this out, but actually feeling what the audience is giving back and responding to that. And that's sort of the thrust of what you're saying, I think, with improv being a part of this.
It is arguably one of the more essential components.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think you expressed it really well there, Sean. You have to receive in order to know what to give. If you're giving what you're interested in or what you have presumed or made assumptions about the other person wanting to receive, then you now have made this a one-way conversation. And when we think about conversation, we're not, again, only looking at verbal, we're looking at energetic dialogue. So then in the receiving, you now know what to offer in order to move the conversation forward and to continue to command their attention. As soon as you are giving them something that's not relevant to them, they will check out because they're no longer interested. The way to ensure that you're always holding them on the edge of their seat is to be responsive to those nonverbal cues that they are paying attention. And the only way to do that is to be present with them, which means, again, coming from heart, not just head.
Yeah, and as you're describing that, I don't know that I have anyone in mind, and I certainly wouldn't name it. But I've had I've seen presentations.
Do it.
do it.
But I've seen presentations where you're left feeling it's almost sleepy, right? It's not landing, and it's information, and you're getting the information, but the person presenting just clearly doesn't know where you are and what
And
you're
let's
hearing and
think
what you
about
mean.
it this way. Let's think about it with a little deeper bit of clarity, and we can kind
Yeah.
of go to sort of breaking down the word here.
Yeah.
Presentation in the word has presence. It is an active process.
Yeah.
It is
Yeah.
an action oriented process. If your audience is passive, you are not doing the correct thing. Everyone needs to be an active participant, and presence is a key component in effective presentation.
Which resonates too, because one of the, I think, key components of teaching is making sure that the audience is actively engaged. And Joe,
Absolutely.
that's
Yeah.
one of the things that we really worked on at Flatiron. So then how do you actually find out what the audience needs, right? Because you're here, you're giving the presentation. How do you know what, aside from just hearing comments or something where someone's like, oh my god, this is taking forever, but usually you're not going to hear that. How do you know what they're getting from it, and how do you know how to respond to that?
When possible, know who your audience is, right? So you know the purpose or desired outcome of a presentation. So let's just start there as baseline. So, what if everybody left this space at the end of my presentation? What do I presume would allow them to feel complete and like this is a valuable use of their time? And I'll say that is not having 37 items of data to now review.
Right.
Right? It's about having a clear point of view, a clear action item, a clear overarching vision, or a clear and established purpose where everybody feels like they now know how to contribute. That is how an effective presentation will end. So when you're presenting, it's not about did they like it? Is this a data point relevant to them? It's about looking for those nonverbal cues of agreement, acknowledgement, and engagement. So you can look for things like head nods. You can look for things like taking notes. You can actively engage and interact with your audience. Correct, Sean? Am I right there?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you can actively find ways to engage your audience. The most effective thing that I see are vocal qualities. So keeping the voice alive, having a point of view and allowing that to be imbued vocally. That means always keeping the voice dynamic. A real simple rule of thumb, everyone who's listening at home, new section, new tone. When I finish a point and now I'm done. The next point I want to make for you is that will alert their ear. So even if they've checked out, because presence is not a permanent state of being, we need to give everybody grace here.
Yeah.
Even if they've checked out, that vocal differentiation will clue them back in. So that's one thing that you can do really effectively. The second thing you can do is eye contact. And when I say eye contact, what that really means is landing points of focus. So even in this platform here, I'm looking at you all through a screen. You better believe I am putting my full energy on each one of you. I call it the line of connectivity, and it needs to feel taut. So it should feel like I am keeping you think about a kite, it's flying in the sky and it's like, whoa, 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 but you've got it really anchored solidly on the spindle. That is how you want your audience to feel. So at any moment, you know that I'm going to be planting my attention on you. Therefore, you're more prone to pay attention to me because you don't want to be caught. And ultimately, you will be caught up in my amazing presentation. But really, it's about really keeping everybody engaged as if we are all part of the same conversation, even if it feels unidirectional.
I think one part that's been so hard about this transition to remote and video conferencing, both for educators and for running meetings, whatever, is building that eye contact and building that connection. You have one issue, which is you just have a little box. I maybe get to see your shoulders, maybe I don't. And maybe I get to see, anything below your neck. Maybe I don't. But of course, like eye contact, beyond the whole camera thing, it's really hard. Um, how did you all and your clients kind of change the way you made those connections, that energy and that tightness, as you mentioned, for the online versus kind of in person?
I love this question, Joe. It's what was so, and I hesitate to say this word, but I'm going to say it. We're all friends here. Exciting about the pandemic for me is that I was perfectly positioned to rise to the occasion to support people in this unknown landscape,
Yeah.
right? And I rose to it. I was like, let's go. So here are some key considerations. And we're still here, right? We still exist in this world and we will now forever exist in this world.
Yep.
We need to shift our mindset a little bit because our viewers aren't necessarily going to be as active in their participation because we have been trained or conditioned to experience things on screen as if we are watching, as if it's
Yeah, of course.
entertainment. So there's going to be less of cues to go off of for the speaker in terms of, are they paying attention? Am I doing a good job? So know that you will have to do what you can for yourself to find that inner sense of purpose without necessarily having that information coming from the other end. So here's how we can think about that. We want to speak through the screen, not to the screen. What that means is it gets your energy going a little bit. Because if I'm just speaking to the screen, I'm like speaking here, right? So I'm just like coming, I'm right looking at you guys and not trying to do anything more. Whereas if I speak through the screen, now I'm really trying to penetrate this space vocally. That doesn't mean loud, right? It just means coming at you and trying to really penetrate the space. So it takes a little bit of intentional activation vocally. In terms of eye contact, and again, I'll go back to equating eye contact and points of focus. I can similarly I'm looking at a book, I'm looking at my ring light, I'm looking at a box of band-aids sitting on my desk, right? Whatever it is. But when I land there, I focus there. So even if I'm presenting to a class and half the students have their boxes off, their cameras off, right? If I'm presenting on a webinar format to my organization and nobody's camera is on and I'm the only one and like actually my little box is just right at the top and it's mostly my deck, how do I make sure people are engaged? By landing points of focus, it will hold me accountable to pretending like there's an audience there that I am playing with. So I see you, I see you, I see you, I see you. And I'm not just looking, I see you. So now I have created an active interaction with these points of focus. So vocally, and then with that sense of focus, you will activate yourself in a way that will hold the audience's attention in a way that, for example, an actor's monologue on a Netflix series would do.
Right, because it's actually it's a similar experience for the actor in a monologue. They're just talking to a camera, but you feel like they're talking
to
at
the freaking camera. People don't understand this. I can't tell you. Yeah, it's so weird. We, as an actor, you would have to during auditions, you would go in and present a monologue, and you'd walk in, and all the casting directors would be there, and you'd be like, "Hello, casting directors. Hello, hello." But you don't look the casting directors in the eye. You look right above their heads, and then you talk to the wall like your life depended on it. And so exactly the same principle holds true here. You got to make that wall matter. So similarly, if you're not speaking to be heard, put it in an email. So that's the most important thing for virtual presentations, right? And in order to sound like you're speaking to be heard, amplify yourself vocally, not volume wise, but really amplify the presence, dial up the presence, and then land those points of focus.
How the heck do you actually, because I've given that feedback to people before, how do you actually get better at the vocal parts of it, the trying to actually be present, trying to be there? You know, I have always had hints of like smile, like I think you can hear when people smile, and there's a few other ones, but without just someone telling you, hey, by the way, you're really monotone and boring. How do you actually practice that? Like the physical bits of it, I guess.
Communication is a physical activity. So it is about training the body. Voice is a symptom of the body, right? Or it's resonant energy. Therefore, it comes from the instrument of the body. Therefore, it stands to reason. We must train the body to now express ourselves in the way in which we intend, to play the music of our thoughts. Now, if that's the principle in mind, if we think about how we've tuned our instrument, and we can think about this more deeply in terms of how we have created habit, which have now become unconscious habits around the way in which we produce voice and connect with others, there's a lot of work to do because that habit is strong. And when we create these habits, so when someone says, oh, you're really monotone, people may not be aware of it. And then the notion of shifting it is really challenging because it actually requires an expansiveness and reorientation of muscular habit. So the way to go about it is vocal play. So Joe, I'll ask you, when's the last time, and we'll take this out of any sort of context of relationship or anything that feels consequential, but when's the last time you were just like, I'm gonna do it, I'm just gonna go, and like I'm obviously like doing my energy lower here so I don't blow out the mic, but you're just like, I'm gonna go, I'm gonna do it, right? Or then you got really, really small, and you got really, really quiet, and you had all these different places in which your voice was going. How many times have you explored stretching the vocal muscle? It is a muscle. And
Yeah.
so when someone says increase vocal dynamics, but you're used to kind of operating in this way, and yes, smiling is a good thing because it does increase brightness of tone, but ultimately, like, it's just not going to do that much
Right.
good.
Yeah.
We cannot know what it feels like to speak through the screen if we're accustomed to only speaking 1 inch in front of our face. So you have to start challenging yourself, which will feel ridiculous. I'm not trying to, cover it up for anybody. It will feel ridiculous. You will feel stupid. But listen, silly is your superpower. And if you're willing to explore in that space of ridiculousness, then so much opportunity opens up for you. So it really is about practicing with play in mind.
I love that. And it's bringing me back to my acting days. So to continue with Joe's question, then say someone listening here is giving feedback to someone who's presenting, and from a managerial perspective or something, and they're doing the monologue thing, the baseline tone, and not that engaging dynamically and all that. Do you literally say, let's do some like, yay, I'm gonna do this thing now, or like do you actually play with those exercises with them? Is that part of the kind of training that you would do when you come into a business that actually engages your services?
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. Typically, what I'll start with is something that feels a bit more innocuous and maybe a little more approachable. So, for
Yeah, I mean, that would be
example,
a level 10
yeah,
or maybe
exactly.
11 to
Like,
start.
hi
Yeah.
everyone, welcome to the training. So first, we're just gonna jiggle our jaws.
Everybody scream.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Everybody
I mean,
screams.
one of the first things we do. So we do a lot of improv to start off. But if we're just looking at something like traditional presentation skills, I always tell people, let's mess it up. Let's be intentionally messy, because when people present, and even in their preparation for a presentation, they tend to prepare with perfection in mind.
Right.
So they already are like, here's how I stand. This is where my hands go. This is where I'm looking. Aren't I polished? Right. And it's like, polish last, people. You know where your hands go. It's fine. Why are we practicing that way?
Hmm.
Practice with play first, polish last. So what that really means is, let's mess it up. So maybe we're walking with a little less sort of formality in our gesture. Maybe we're using filler words, or maybe we're inviting some colloquial language that feels a little bit more of my vernacular and less business speak. Maybe I'm inviting some stories that I might not necessarily feel appropriate, but once I try them out, I realize are completely aligned to the example I'm trying to give and actually bring me and my audience to life in a new way. So there are ways to sort of invite this notion of disruption before we come into these more formal practices, or that are literally practices, right? It's like going to the gym, right? You're not like, I want a six pack. Let me think about it, right? It's like, if you want to,
That'd be nice.
yeah, correct, right? There's a pill for that. Just kidding. So
Yeah, I guess.
when we think about becoming a good presenter, we have to practice. And practice again with play in mind, and polish last. We all know, if you don't know how to polish at this point, like, become a farmer. Like, it's fine. And so we all know what that looks like. We can Google it. What we can't Google is how we come to life within that space. So that's the thing to practice. How does it feel when I kind of go into higher registers of my voice? How does it feel when I use bolder gesture? How does it feel when I use my body intentionally? How does it feel when I explore levels and interact with the people in the space? We won't know that until we try it. And that's really where practice comes in, and consistent practice, so we really see the development that we're looking to achieve.
I love this because you're taking all of that acting training, right? All the stuff that you would do in a theater class or in preparing for a play or something like that, and you're bringing this into the world of presentations. You don't rehearse the play in its final form. You rehearse these bits and pieces with different ideas, and you say, okay, what if I were to play this whole scene furious, and what if I were to play this whole scene happy out of my mind, and then what parts of that do you pull from in the actual performance? You're bringing that in, and you're saying, don't rehearse the presentation the way that you think it's going to go. Rehearse it in all sorts of ways that sort of free you up to do the presentation the best way you could.
That is such a spot on analogy, Sean. I was doing this with a client the other day, and I came to her office, and it was right at the end of the workday, and we were in a conference room. The receptionist was right outside, and I had her do this. And when we finished the session and we came out, the receptionist was like, "Well, that sounded fun."
I imagine it sounds pretty. And I mean, I love those kind of out of context moments, which is, it sounds crazy, whatever the heck is going on in that room.
Yeah.
It's great.
If Joe, if that is not the response I receive, then I haven't done my job.
There you go. I mean, all this stuff it feels so similar to stretching, right? Which is when I stretch my whatever hamstrings by like touching my toes, I'm not touching my toes day in, day out, but by going beyond my normal, I'm then able to do my normal better, a little bit bigger, wider, whatever. Ends up being the same thing, I guess. Like, and it's not always nice to kind of have, I guess, a facilitator to give you that license to be crazy. In a way, if you did it yourself, you'd look a little weird.
Exactly. And I look at it as like permission to play, permission to think in a disruptive way. I'll give you a great example. There's this woman I was working with on a presentation. She did ad sales for a large organization, and her numbers had started to dip. And so she called me in and said, "Can you help me sort of figure out how to bring this presentation back to life?" It was a standard deck that they did mild customizations on, depending on the pitch. So I watched her present a couple times, and I was like, "Why don't you tell stories in this place, in this place, in this place?" And this was her response: "I can do that." Literally giving people permission, because rules are either explicit or assumed, right? So we either have explicit rules of the game or assumed rules of the game. And many of the assumed rules of the game are around protecting our own vulnerability that we create based on what we think other people want to see. So if we disrupt our own rules of the game to now say, what do I want to bring versus what do other people want to see, that now gives us explicit permission to play freely and play with very deep intentional purpose.
Okay, so speaking of the facilitator giving permission, one of the things that we talked about doing here is an exercise like the ones that you would actually do. And I think this is a perfect time to go into that. What would you want to try with us?
All right. I know we were going back and forth around two things, and I said I would surprise you at the end at which one I chose. So here we are.
It is about improv.
Ready?
So.
Okay. We're going to do vocal play. So in my workshops, what I'm about to do with you is a little warm up that leads to a larger exercise I created called New Choice, which is essentially role play, making continually new vocal decisions.
Okay.
What is communicated through the voice is arguably more important than what is communicated through your words. What I mean by that is I can say something as simple as, "Hi," and I can shift my tone, which distinctly shifts my point of view, perceived point of view, which shifts the way in which you receive that word. Hi. 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 Totally different meanings.
Yeah.
Just by shifting the tone. So we're going to play a game here called I Want a Pickle.
All right, let's do it.
Love pickles.
Okay. This is a phrase that means nothing. And we're now going to make it mean everything.
Okay.
Okay. So we're just going to start by just saying, and let's go one at a time here, maybe, so that we don't overlap. So we'll just always pick a consistent order. So we'll go Sean, Joe, Sean, Joe, Sean, Joe.
Okay.
Okay.
Great.
So we're just going to start really simple. And you're going to go back to back. Don't wait for me to cue you. Okay. So Sean, I'll tell you when to go, and then Joe, you just hop right on the back. Okay.
Cool.
We're just going to start really simply, neutral, normal tone. I want a pickle. Sean.
Oh, I should do it. I want a pickle.
I want a pickle.
Great. Let's do it one more time. I want a pickle.
I want a pickle.
I want a pickle.
Excellent. Now we're going to say it quiet. I want a pickle.
I want a pickle.
Sean, I don't think we even heard you.
Could you not hear me? I want a pickle.
I want a pickle.
Now we're going to say it loud. I want a pickle.
I want a pickle.
I want a pickle.
Now we're going to say it like we're flirting. I want a pickle.
I want a pickle.
I don't even know how to flirt.
I believe
I want a pickle.
Amazing. Don't worry, we're not done yet. Now
Do my
you're going to say it like you're scolding. I want a pickle.
I want a pickle.
I want a pickle.
Now we're going to say it like we're encouraging. I want a pickle.
I want a pickle.
I want a pickle.
Okay, awesome. So let's reflect there. Yes, well done, gentlemen. Way to just
did it.
step up to the plate and get
Made
weird.
it to the end.
There you
I'm
go.
just hoping my
Silly is
family
your
heard
dude.
this.
What'd you say, Sean?
I'm just hoping my family heard this conversation.
Oh my gosh, there you go.
Yeah, this is a family friendly activity. So this is a great warm up prior to practicing a presentation. By the way, it's just something simple to like get your voice active. What I hope your listeners noticed here was a couple things. One, even at the direction of a certain point of view or attitude, the way in which each of us expressed that, although similar, was distinct in its quality.
Yeah.
So however you share your voice, there is no right because there's only you. Right. So we think that there's an ideal outcome, but ultimately it's your expression and commitment to that expression that matters most. Mm-hmm. The other thing I hope we identified is how distinctly different all of them were, simply by making different vocal choices around a tone or point of view. And this is something that we can think about. So going back to the notion of new section, new tone, if I know I'm moving out of a part of the presentation where I've sort of laid the groundwork for where we are now, and then I'm moving into a section where I'm sort of confronting the problems or obstacles that exist, I can now make distinct decisions about shifting my tone within each one of those sections. I can even do it slide to slide, moment to moment. And once you become really practiced, you can even do it in moments that don't even matter. So you can find ways to shift it on the fly. And your vocal quality is going to be one of your greatest assets for influence. So when we think about shifting from slide to slide, so example, the status quo, I can maybe let people know that we're here right now in a reassuring tone. And this is where we've come to. This is where we're at. We've done great work, guys. Don't worry. We're getting there. And then maybe I move into a more sincere tone in the problems. But I really see some things coming in that aren't necessarily positive that I just want to prepare you for. But then maybe I shift in the solution section and I invite optimism. But here's the cool thing. We have so much in store, right? So I can now create vocally for myself activation around a specific point of view that carries with it an emotional quality. And by doing so, connect or indicate for my audience an emotional experience that is aligned for them. So now I give them permission to care. So you now have this energetic space of empathy and understanding, all because you've made specific vocal choices.
I love that. And it's sort of a good, if somebody's listening in who needs to give a presentation. It's sort of a good warm up, like you said,
Yeah.
going into those different voices and inflections and range and loudness and softness and all of that stuff before. It's just a good vocal warm up to begin with, but it also, again, just frees them up to go there in the presentation itself
And this
in ways
reminds
that they might
me,
not have thought of. Yeah.
100%. Yeah, it totally breaks the barrier of boundary
Yeah.
of habit, right? So
Yeah.
it does, like to Joe's point, it literally stretches the vocal muscle. What it also does is it can upset the expectation of your audience. So you can either de-escalate if something feels like people have gotten out of control, maybe you've lost your audience. You can make vocal choices that will bring them back. If you feel like they've also become disengaged, you can make vocal choices that bring them back as well. So if they've really checked out and you're sort of operating this level, okay, so, and you can make choices about that.
Yeah, which is not, like you said, to bring it back, it's not something that you can plan for as you prepare for your presentation. You can't say, okay, at this point, or should you? But at this point, I think I'll have lost my audience, so that's where I'll say it this way.
But I mean, that's where you can bring the storytelling part of it in, right? Minna, you mentioned having kind of your story moments of, you'll have the climax of the story, you'll have the major conflict, you'll have the character introduction part, and I think different parts of the stories lend themselves to different voices.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think you end up accidentally kind of planning your voices just by planning your story.
That's exactly right. So if we think about it as playing the music of your thoughts, like a good song, we got like the slow intro, and then it gets a little bit faster, right? And then maybe the chorus kicks in, and then you get to the bridge part, right? And you're like this, and you're waiting. You can feel the anticipation of the crescendo into the moment when things get really building, you build, and you build, and you build, and then it like slowly fades out. You can do the same thing vocally. It is like mind blowing. I'm sorry, this is where I get really excited. It was so the opportunity here is like infinite, and it's the most underutilized resource, and it's mind-blowing to me that people are not clued into this.
Well, clearly something that you've been very successful at creating a business around this, and I'm sure that places that are bringing you in are really benefiting from this. I can see how much joy you bring to this experience, and just how much fun these workshops must be. And I imagine I don't know exactly what you call them when you go in to do these workshops, but when somebody in a business setting hears improv, their first reaction might be, oh God, don't call on me, let someone else do it. And you have this way of really making it feel safe and fun, and it feels just eye-opening to see how you create that experience, hear you talk about that experience, and I can really see the value in what you're bringing in. So,
you know what's interesting is the first thing people hear is, oh, that's stupid, because they think it's like frivolous and unnecessary. And I'm like,
why do we
the
play?
phone, folks, it's the most necessary thing if done well. Because there are plenty of companies that just come in and they're like, let's zip zap zap. Okay, bye. But I think if we really, and going back to how the pandemic really supported me to gain clarity around work, we've been doing improv, right? Over and over and over. And I had to say, well, what are we doing through improv? What is sort of the essence of that? Improv is the tool, but play is the practice. If play is the practice, play ignite for us? What opportunity does it now expose for us? And how can we leverage that as the primary driver for these trainings? Improv just happens to be the tool. So every time we bring in improv, it's not about the improv. We actually do very little improv. Improv is a way of exploring, and then we spend a lot of time reflecting on practical application around what it is we observed, experienced, or discovered.
Love it. Yeah, it sounds like, back to Joe's question of how do you give that kind of feedback to someone when they're sort of floundering on a presentation or doing a monotone or whatever, and it just feels like such, not just good training for the people who are doing the presentation, but for people who would be working with those people or supervising those people. It feels like just such good training to be able to walk away from that, not only saying, okay, I can do a presentation, or am more confident in doing a presentation better, I know the vocal technique a bit more, but to be able to then work with other people who you supervise, who you need to give feedback to as they give their presentations. And it's more than just, yeah, it felt flat. Can you be more exciting? But you actually have the tools now to say, here's how we can make it more exciting. And it's through the rehearsal and the practice of those things that are not what you would necessarily do that you get to the point that it's a great presentation. It's just, it feels like this wonderful roundabout way of getting to a better place that just makes so much sense, but you wouldn't necessarily think of.
Well, because when we say things like, can you do it again, but like, make it louder, like,
yeah, do it again, but better.
More interesting. Right. We think we're getting to the point.
Yeah.
But so if I can mention my book here for a moment, the whole reason I wrote my book, The Confident Body, is because how many times have you heard the words, just be confident, just like be confident. And we think we're being helpful when in fact we've said nothing of value. So I break down what that actually means, right? I go in very comprehensive form, break down for people what it means when we seek to explore the behavior and practice of confidence. Similarly, when someone says, okay, just like do it, like bring it, make it a little more interesting. Okay, you've told me nothing in that statement. So now we can say, bring your voice to life. Mm-hmm. Activate your body in ways that feel playful. Actually, let's take a second and let's work toward mistake. What happens if we seek flaw? Let's try it again, because now you're giving people permission to be messy, to mess up, to look foolish. And that is where there is landscape ripe for discovery and untapped potential to be more effective than you could have ever imagined in your land on the other side of the fence.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes so much sense. And so we'll link to the book. Thank you for bringing that in. We'll link to the book as well as your website. And so people who are listening can go and really see what you're doing. If there's a link to, I think we can include a link to the PowerPoint karaoke events, right? You have something that we can share?
Yeah,
I hope.
We have a website and everything, man. We're
there we go.
Professional.
All right, fantastic. Yeah, so we'll link to the World Championship of PowerPoint Karaoke. And so if you've had as much fun listening to Minna here as we have, you can go and dig a lot more. And hopefully someone listening will want to bring you in to help them build better presentation skills. So
fantastic. I'm all about that life.
Yeah, that'd be wonderful. Well, Minna, thank you so much for joining. Really, really wonderful conversation. This was so much fun. And just thank you for taking the time to do this with us.
Sean, Joe, I am really grateful for you having me on. I'm on a mission to bring play to the masses. So anytime I have an opportunity to share the wisdom and mission, I'm just always filled with gratitude. So thanks for believing.
Well, the joy definitely comes through. All right, folks. Well, that's all for now. Thank you for listening, and always keep learning.
Did you learn something just now? Get the full episode of Ways We Learn wherever you get your podcasts. And while you're there, we'd love to get your rating or review.